So here's another story. Okay. Many toxic substances inside our bodies are inactivated by a number of proteins, including one called glutathione S-transferase. Big name, doesn't matter. About 25% of humans don't have glutathione S-transferase theta, which is the version of the enzyme that works on methyl iodide. Some humans don't even have it. Will they be more susceptible to methyl iodide toxicity? I don't know. It hasn't been studied, but they might be. Plus, there are a myriad of other ways that subsets of humans can be more sensitive to methyl iodide. So to be prudent, another safety factor of tenfold is added. And so that is what I described in slide number 9. Now I want to go to the actual data on fetal death in rabbits. It's in table 34A, a portion of which I have in slide number 10 here. So this is the data for either death or late resorption of fetuses. With no methyl iodide, 2% of the fetuses are lost. That's right here. With 2 parts per million, 5% of fetuses are lost. 10 parts per million is 17%. And 20 parts per million is 31%. They're the numbers that I have boxed there. Now I've taken that data and I plotted it down here. Here's a plot of parts per million. Here's a plot percent fetuses lost. Remember we said the 2 parts per million is the NOEL, the no observed effect level. And you'll notice that it's actually above the point with no methyl iodide. How could you call that a NOEL? And the answer is that 5% is bigger than 2%, but it's not statistically significant. It can't prove that it's really different statistically. But the data look very suspicious. Now, let's keep another thing in mind here. We're talking about fetal death, which is a gross indicator of toxicity. We don't know what's causing fetal death in rabbits. Let's just imagine that it's causing disruption of the endocrine system that makes hormones. The endocrine system is undoubtedly really fouled up if it's causing fetal death. It's very likely that rabbits exposed to a level just below that level are not probably perfectly okay. The endocrine system is still being disrupted, and this disruption is still probably causing subtler effects. It's just not killing the fetus. So because of these kinds of factors, the uncertainty in the NOEL, plus the gross indicator of fetal death, it's important to add another uncertainty factor of tenfold. And that's how we ultimately get to the value of 0.8 parts per billion. It's through those 4 steps. Now, I want to add that some of my colleagues are going to tell you why this value is even too high. Now, I've discussed fetal death because it's what's mentioned by DPR in their decision to register. But there are a myriad of other adverse health effects that methyl iodide causes, and they are shown in Table 14. And I've put boxes around all those that are significantly below the level proposed by DPR now. There's one in particular that I want to mention, which is the general public hazard from cancer risk, which is 0.04 parts per billion. Now, having just one toxic endpoint, I think, is a reason for concern, but having so many toxic endpoints, all in the same range of concentration, represents a big red flag to me as far as I'm concerned. One of them is going to turn out to be a huge hazard to these people who are working or living in the vicinity of methyl iodide. Now, I've read through the decision to register document, And there's no explanation offered for why these uncertainty factors can be ignored. Why a value 120 times higher is offered. Why is that unnecessary? I have no idea. I can't evaluate it. There's no information there. But I want to go through another puzzle, which starts with a sentence, which I won't read all of. It's here in slide 15. But it talks about principles used by the US EPA, and this puzzles me. So for fetal death, the US EPA used 10 parts per million as their NOEL. That's off to the left here. And DPR used 2 parts per million, a difference of 5-fold. So the US EPA ended up with a value of a standard of 193 parts per billion. Well, if they used the same principles as the US EPA, you would expect that the value that they propose would be 5 times less, or about 40 parts per billion, which is down here in slide 17. But they don't. They're proposing 96, 2.5-fold higher. How come? I don't know. But their verbiage, and if you read through the verbiage on page 5 in their document, it sounds like they're being very protective, and they're doing all the things that I just went through. But the actual number that they end up with doesn't match the verbiage. Now, I just want to step out of my role as a scientific advisor and just make a personal statement. In one of the hearings, we heard from 100 farm workers. About 40 testified. I couldn't help but think that if I were a worker walking into that field, what principles would I hope would be applied? I would want a level of methyl iodide I'd be comfortable with, and that is not 96 parts per billion. I think I've talked long enough. I do have some specific responses to some of the comments made earlier, but I think in the interest of my colleagues, I'll defer those comments until possibly a later time.
Okay, let's. I'd like to hear your responses, a few of them now, and then we'll go around. You might save some folks some responses at the end, is what I'm saying.
Well, to begin with, I heard the comment that we didn't have the benefit of being risk managers. And then I heard the statement that, of course, I'm just a layperson here. And I wonder, in a scientific matter having to do with health hazards, what possible advantage is it to be a layperson in evaluating these health risks? What is the benefit of being a layperson as a risk manager in trying to evaluate the scientific basis of health hazards? I'm totally baffled by that particular statement. We heard about the need to include economic and social issues, something like that. And I don't know, this is just my feeling, you know. It seemed like we were being offered 2 alternatives. Use methyl iodide and jeopardize the health of workers and their families. Use methyl bromide and deplete the ozone. The third possibility is you don't use methyl iodide or methyl bromide and you make strawberries a little more expensive. And I don't know, but when you're left with these kinds of serious issues, depleting the ozone, hurting workers and people who live in the fields nearby by adopting a standard that makes no sense whatsoever, that third option begins to sound like not unreasonable. Let's just charge a little bit more for strawberries. If people understood, I think they might consider